We're going to start the next panel. This is on women's participation in labor markets, evidence and policy. Moderating this panel is Roberta Gatti, Chief Economist, World Bank. So over to you, Roberta. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. And I have to confess that I actually pushed myself onto this panel, and I wanted to be the moderator of this panel because I think that we're going to have a very interesting and rich discussion. We will start the discussion with some introductory remarks by Dr. Annabel Kraus, who's the Deputy Director of Gender Growth. That's the G square that you have seen around in labor markets in low-income countries program, which is based in IZA in Bonn, and followed by Ms. Kate Cooper, who's an economist in the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. So Annabel and then Kate, over to you to start us off.
Yeah, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you all for joining our panel on women's participation in labor markets. Yeah, I'm the Deputy Director of the Gender Growth and Labor Markets in Low-Income Countries program, or in short, G2LM-LIC. This research program is funded by FCDO and managed by IZA in Germany, with Oriana Bandiera from LSE in London heading the program. And we are one of the organizing institutions of this conference, and we are very excited about this day 3 of the conference and this upcoming panel. So let me briefly tell you about the goals of G2LM-LIC. There are 3 main objectives. First, we fund high-quality research projects in Africa and South Asia that combine gender and labor economics research questions. Second, we organize capacity-building activities for local researchers from Africa and South Asia via online or in-person classes and also via a mentoring program. And we aim to have local researchers on each research team. And third, we want to disseminate the evidence from our projects to the policy discourse in order to give guidance about future gender and labor policies. So this upcoming policy panel here is really at the heart of G2LM-LIC and its objectives, with 3 of our funded projects discussing the evidence here. And it's the first time we are having a G2LM-LIC event in Pakistan, and we are more than grateful that this is now taking place. We have already heard a few times in the last 2 days that female labor force participation is rather low in Pakistan, although education levels are rising. So the panel will be discussing an important but complex topic. And I would like to thank all panelists and Roberta for their participation, moderation, and their engagement on this. And I also would like to thank the Path to Deaf Corporation, especially all colleagues from LUMS, for the wonderful organization of this entire event. And with this, I'm handing over to Kate Cooper, Women's Economic Empowerment Advisor at FCDO. Thank you.
This is a bit high for me. So, hi, I'm Kate Cooper. I'm an economist at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and I sit in our Research and Evidence Division and lead our portfolio on women's economic empowerment. I'm not going to say too much because I think the brains on the panel have got far more interesting things to say than I do, but just to say a very brief personal thanks for the past few days, fascinating and wide-ranging presentations and exciting and innovative research. And a big thank you to colleagues at LUMS. I think this has been a fantastically organised conference. I just wanted to say one thing to kind of, I guess, take a step back and think about the big picture and why does this matter? So we know growth is central to poverty reduction, and we know it's often driven by the private sector. But I guess there is a real question about how do we encourage poverty-reducing growth? It's a question that we will try and answer, I think. And the World Bank have produced a growth report that tells us that sustained poverty-reducing growth hinges on policy reform and effective policy implementation. And so I'm really excited to hear from the panel today about how we can ensure that women's economic empowerment and women's part of the story of inclusive growth is part of that policy reform story. So thank you for having us, and handing over now to the panel.
Thank you, Annabel and Kate. Thank you. And now we're turning to a section of our conversation today where we're going to have three presentations. Kate Vyborny is going to start us off. Kate is an economist at the World Bank in the South Asia region, and she works on gender, labor markets, public services, with a particular focus on female labor force participation and jobs here in Pakistan. So Kate will give us a sense of the main findings of her research, not just the paper. I mean, we saw you yesterday with a great presentation on safety of transportation. And all of these have one thing in common, which is this great platform that is called Job Talash. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you so much. Can I move around? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
It's easier, I think. Okay, so thank you, Roberta, and thank you again to the organizers of the conference. I'm going to be presenting a quick whirlwind tour in 10 minutes of some of the things we've learned running our own job search platform in collaboration with SERP over the past few years. And I think someone else is going to advance the slides, right? Next, yeah, perfect. I will advance the slides. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about why we decided to do this research agenda on a job matching platform and set up a job matching platform in order to execute it. Then I'm going to talk about a few things we've learned about labor supply and then a few things we've learned about labor demand. We worked with SERP, the Center for Economic Research in Pakistan, to set up a low-tech job search platform in Lahore district here in Pakistan, which for two reasons. Basically, one, we wanted to be able to get really, really granular data on both the supply side and the demand side of the job search process, to be able to understand what are the decisions made by women and men when they decide to search and apply for jobs, and then what are the decisions made by firms when they decide to post ads, invite candidates for interviews, et cetera. So the first reason to do this is to get this amazing data, generate and be able to analyze it, and to be able to use that to say something about both the supply and demand side constraints to female labor force participation. And beyond just being able to observe, then having this platform also is going to allow us to run lots of experiments so we can test out new things. Sometimes those are the things that might make sense to scale. Sometimes those are things that, that might make sense just in order to understand and quantify the extent of a problem or challenge. So how does this actually look? This is a flyer inviting people to, this is the English version, of course we have the Urdu version is what's actually used in the field. The flyer invites candidates to sign up for Job Talash. They go through a phone-based sign-up process in which they populate a CV, and then they start getting these monthly text messages for jobs that they've been matched to. Some of this is a repeat from yesterday, but I wasn't sure how much overlap there would be in the audience. So just to kind of, or if it was a sleepy time, it was the first thing in the morning yesterday. So just to recap, one thing that we took particular care for here was to try to start with a big sample of people, which is not restricted to just people that are searching for a job to begin with. So a lot of studies, if you're trying to run a labor market study, like a natural thing to do might be go and find people who are looking for a job, and those might be people at a job search center or people who are finishing, say, a TVET course, and that's going to tell us some really important things for that population. But one thing it's not going to tell us, which we think is very interesting for some of our research questions, is about people who don't work and don't search because they think there's no point in looking. And it's going to turn out, I'm just going to argue in a second, that that's quite a lot of people and quite a lot of women. And so we want to understand more about how some of these constraints interact with latent labor supply. Moreover, we also enroll, in order to get to this, to resolve this, we send teams door to door in a randomly selected set of neighborhoods all across the Lahore urban and peri-urban areas. You can see some peri-urban areas out here. And they go door to door with those flyers that I showed. And they take a super small little listing of the household, and then they invite all the adults who might be interested to sign up for the platform. And so that's going to allow us to capture these people who might not be working and might not even be searching to begin with, to be able to speak to that margin. We're also interested in an additional population that we go out and recruit, which are women who are finishing tertiary education. This part was in collaboration with the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women, which is the Punjab analog to Laila's body. So that we worked with them on working with the tertiary education institutes to enroll women as they're getting close to graduation. We think that's also a population that's quite important. But again, this sort of similar theme here that we don't go and say, oh, who's interested in, our main samples here are not going out and saying who's interested in signing up for this thing. It's kind of doing a broad brush enrollment that's kind of offered by default to students in these graduating cohorts. So that also has that similar kind of component. We do a similar process for employer enrollment. So for a lot of the questions that we're interested in, we might want to say something about a representative sample of firms or a sample of firms that are not just those who came and signed up with us. And so we again go door to door to capture them. Once we have this, we ask all the firms every month if they have a job they'd like to post with the service. And if they do, it goes into our matching algorithm, which is a super simple thing, which just says, does this job seeker match this job in terms of 3-4 characteristics, so education, experience, and has she said that she's interested in working at that occupation? And then after that, so what this means is that we're going to see, so this is to the point about being able to observe everything, we're going to see exactly what the job seeker sees and what the firm sees throughout the process, which means that it gets us a long way towards being able to pinpoint decisions on the supply side and decisions on the demand side, with the caveat that there's always some degree to which both sides are sort of making decisions in expectation of what the other side will do, but it still gets us a lot further than if we just went straight downstream and asked, like, is somebody working or not? Okay, so a few things that we've learned about labor supply. The first is the one that I was alluding to just a second ago. So we have survey data from previous kind of national surveys. This is just the urban Punjab sample of the Pakistan DHS, in which 19% of women are working, but another 26% say that they're not working, but they would like to work if they could find a suitable job. What's a suitable job? That's not discussed. In the interview, the DHS is a survey that focuses on health and child outcomes, but it's really kind of provocative and interesting. It suggests that, if we had elastic kind of labor demand, and if we could solve some of these constraints, some of the constraints that we're going to start thinking about here, that we could be leading to potentially quite big expansion in the female labor force. Among the people who sign up on Job Talash from that door-to-door sample that I talked about, not the college sample, almost 60% of them are neither working nor searching at baseline, but they signed up through a job search platform, so they're clearly interested. In order to sign up, they have to actually go through this process of telling their whole, kind of talking through the CV on the phone with the call center agent, and so that takes some effort, which suggests that they are genuinely interested in working, maybe more so than the survey question, which might be kind of a throwaway answer. And so in this joint work with a team of co-authors, including Sonia, who's here today, this is one of the kind of the findings that we highlight, is that, look, these things are just prima facie evidence of this idea of latent female labor supply. So one of the policy takeaways of this, among others, is that if we're going to undertake interventions to try to increase women's work, we should be keeping in mind how do we do the outreach for that, right? Like, how do you go out and tell women about the available opportunities? We did all of this for the study, but if I were sitting with like a government or an NGO hat on trying to decide what kind of interventions to run to shift the needle on this, I would be thinking about these women who it might not hear about an opportunity if we targeted it based on looking in the places that you find job seekers. Okay. Second finding I want to highlight is this one that, if you were here first thing yesterday morning, you would have seen this graph already. But just to recap extremely briefly, we run an experiment in which we offer safe transport in addition to a job ad. So there's a control group who are just getting those job ads that I showed in the SMS, and then there's a treatment group that are getting a job ad, and it says, with this job, like Job Talash is offering a pick and drop service that goes to this job, and what we see is that dramatically increases the rate at which women apply for those jobs. And this is going to be particularly strong for the case in which the transport to the job is for women only. So solving constraints about safety and safe physical mobility as well as social propriety of moving outside the home. Okay, so third thing I want to highlight on the labor supply side is this issue of bridging the digital divide. So we have a paper that's not really pitched as a gender paper, but it is kind of pitched more around understanding the barriers and returns to search, but I think it has important implications for gender. So in this study, we have the base setup where every month those SMSs go out to everyone who's subscribed. It says, Kate, you've matched to a job, a possible job opportunity as a receptionist, working at ABC company in this place, for this salary. I get, say, 3-4 of those messages a month. And by default, I can call the hotline to apply for that job. Or in the treatment arm, the hotline calls me to say, hey, did you see our text? Would you like to apply for that job? And that leads to a 600%, that is not a typo, increase in job applications. This is for job seekers kind of across the board. And so what we argue in the paper is that this really highlights the psychological barriers to search, but it also is going to be relevant for gender, in part because in Pakistan, 8 men out of 10 own a cell phone, but only 4 women out of 10 own a cell phone. And so you can see how just even getting access to the information as it goes out, like the means of communication is going to matter. And a part of what's going on in the background of this experiment is that when we call, we do ask to speak to the person who's being matched to the job. So if the household shares a phone, you could imagine how that would be relevant. So what's the policy takeaway from this? Oh, and so the other thing that is shown in this graph is that those extra job applications that they make in response to that nudge phone call are just as productive as the ones that they would make if they just got the SMS, in the sense that they get invited for interviews just as often off of those extra applications. So what's the kind of takeaway from this from a policy perspective? I think the key thing is that we know there's this huge digital gender gap. If we want to reach job seekers in general, especially from kind of lower ed segments or lower SES segments, but especially women, digital delivery is not enough. So we would need approaches to navigate shared devices and navigate other kinds of barriers to digital uptake. So we have, Sargil actually in October is going to be launching a report which is the audience of which is job search platforms on how to do this stuff better. So it's called Making Job Platforms Work Better for Women. And this is one of the things that we talk about in that forthcoming report. Okay, number 4, and I think the last one that I wanted to highlight on the supply side is this issue of occupational choice. So this is big literature thinking about what sorts of jobs do women search for, how do they differ from jobs that men search for. And so with Hamna and Zunia and another collaborator, we have this experiment that we don't have a paper yet, but I just thought I'd highlight the kind of takeaway finding which we're excited about that's just kind of come out from analysis work over the last weeks, which is that we go to that college sample that I talked about, the women who are graduating from tertiary ed, and 1 minute? Okay. We tell them that sign up for this job search service, and in the treatment group, we tell them which jobs are in demand. And the takeaway is women don't apply by default for jobs that are in demand. Just a tiny little nudge will shift that. Takeaway, we need to do better career placement for in tertiary ed. Okay, 2 things on demand, 30 seconds each. Firms largely recruit through referrals. Everything's done through the social network. I'm sure you all know that. Women have more limited professional networks. So our hypothesis was reference provision, like reference letters, could help to bridge this gap. We have a whole sort of interlinked set of experiments on references, but it turns out to be more complicated than what I just suggested, because reference checking reduces misreporting. Reference checking is hugely valued by employers, but it's actually more valued for men than for women. Maybe the employers think the men are more likely to exaggerate their CVs. I'm not sure. Women also have a harder time getting hold of a reference from a former supervisor. Maybe hard to call the supervisor who's a man, ask him for the reference. Finally, employer gender restrictions. In that paper I referenced earlier, we try to decompose using the data from the platform how much is supply, how much is demand. It's not perfect, but it gets us a long way towards that answer. And the biggest thing that pops out of that analysis is employers just don't open jobs to women in a huge fraction of the cases. That massively shrinks the set of things they can search for. So now we're running a study to try to test either nudging or actually requiring firms to open jobs for women. TBD what the answers are, but it's not clear ex ante whether this is actually something we should be doing. So thank you so much to the amazing team at SERP and to all of our collaborators at Lahore School and elsewhere, and to G2LM for funding a lot of this work. Without that, it wouldn't have been possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate, for navigating us through a tour de force that covered the latent labor supply and different interventions on safe transport, on bridging the digital divide and access to devices, and also on this interesting evidence of what women search for. I hope we have a chance to talk a little bit more during the Q&A. And also on the demand side, completely counterintuitive what you were showing on referrals, but I look forward to learning more from the paper. But we'll have a chance to actually delve deeper on the barriers to female labor force participation, exactly the margin between latent and actual, with the presentation of Dr. Hamna Ahmed, who is an associate professor of economics at the Lahore School of Economics, and her research lies in the intersection of very interesting fields: behavioral, labor markets, political economy, and how psychosocial and institutional factors shape women and economic participation. So over to you, Dr. Hamna.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me in the mic? Okay, great. Thank you to the organizers for such a great event. Farah, Laila, Annabelle, thank you for having me. So I'm going to be talking about this study that's been funded very generously by G2LM as a program. And this is with co-authors, Farah and Zunia are present here, and I'm hoping they'll take all the questions on my behalf. But basically in this project, we look at whether a low-cost motivational nudge by exposing women to role models can kind of improve their labor force participation outcomes. The motivation for this stems from the fact, I think I don't need to go into that, into the fact that, you know, labor force participation rates amongst women are amongst the lowest in South Asia. And in particular in Pakistan, we've seen over time that there's gender parity in tertiary education, but only a quarter of women actually transition into the labor market. The other motivation also stems from literature that shows that beyond external constraints, you know, internal constraints like their confidence, self-confidence, you know, how much exposure they have to mentors, role models, peer support, all of these things can have an impact on labor market outcomes for women. So what is the setting in which we look at this? Well, we work with about 2,500 female undergraduate students from public colleges across Lahore. And the spread of this is shown through these red dots on this map of Lahore. And we essentially randomly kind of one half of these students out of these 2,400 are selected into a treatment group. What does the treatment look like? Well, essentially, women in the treatment group, they're exposed to a 10-minute documentary on role models who are successfully and kind of gainfully employed in different occupations, in a diverse range of occupations, actually. So these are stories of real women who are shown on this slide. And they work in, you know, so one of them was a lecturer, another was a PhD student, they're curators, one was even a police constable. So essentially the main objective of the documentary was to showcase that, you know, effort, perseverance, hard work pays off, that being economically empowered and independent can actually be beneficial for the household as well as for the individual female as well. And in contrast to that, women in the placebo group or the control group watched a documentary that, not a documentary, a video that was on dengue prevention. So it was completely unrelated to labor market outcomes. I'm skipping all of the technical details and happy to chat about that later, but essentially I'll move directly to the findings. Four main findings that I want you to take away from this study. The first is, so here I'm presenting descriptive data, and the first main finding that we observe is that when we talk to these women, a large portion of these women look up to their mothers as role models. And if you look at this red bar, what's striking to see is that 94% of female of these women, their mothers are housewives, they're not working. So essentially they lack, they don't have economically active women who can model that you can do all of this successfully in their lives as such. We also find other constraints that women report to be hampering, women's participation in the market, and we club these into three main groups. So things like household dynamics, which relate to approval from the husband or the in-laws or parents. We also find that their internal beliefs about whether they can balance work and life, or their work life and their family life, whether they can balance that with unpaid care burdens. Within the household, we also find some evidence that about their perceptions of discrimination in jobs, in getting jobs, in the kind of wages they get, as well as in being promoted eventually. And also some also report, safety concerns and potential harassment concerns as to be kind of the main constraints that emerge from the data based on the interviews. A second finding that we see, so we test whether our respondents or women in the treatment group, they engaged with the video. And we do this by constructing a transport index, which essentially the main objective here is to test whether they felt emotionally connected or affected by these videos, whether they got curious about and wanted to know more about these women and their lives, and whether they felt that they could relate to them in any way. And what we find is that women did in the treatment groups, emotionally engaged with these videos. We also check whether it had an impact on shifting their mindsets by looking at validated scales of beliefs about these women's ability. And we see a shift on mindsets also. This is right after we administer the intervention. Subsequently, we follow these women at different stages over the next 18 months, periodically 9 months, 15 months, 18 months after we administer the intervention. And what we're showing here are impacts on job search at different, so each line here represents different time periods at which we followed them. And we also look at impacts on work status. And the key finding that we see here is that we don't observe, we observe some impact, some movement perhaps on job search, which is not really significant 9 months later. But in general, we don't see effects on job search. But 18 months after the intervention, we do see moderate impacts. About women in the treated group are about 4.7 percentage points more likely to be working. And then finally, we look at who is driving. So what are the characteristics of these women who are working? And we find that, so we use machine learning methods to classify, these women into low income, low education households based on their parental education, and high income and high parental education households. And just to give you a perspective, women in the low income group, they're earning about, $250. So their household income is about $250 a month. High income is about $350 a month. And then their parents are, have about, the father has about 6 years of education, the mother has about 3 years of education in the low education category, and about twice as much education in the high education category. And what we find interestingly is that the entire shift in transition into the labor market is being driven by those who are in the low income and low education category or group. I also want to highlight that this was a time that coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we do see a sharp decrease in jobs generally in both our treated and control group, so we think that this is driven by the fact that at this point, by 18 months, there was greater need. And therefore, this kind of maybe perhaps pushed a lot of these women who were on the margin to actually start working. So in conclusion, what does this study help us highlight? Well, it shows us that beyond material constraints like transport and wages and a lot of other things that Kate has just talked about, internal barriers are significant. They're important. And however, what we also kind of want the audience to go away from this, from after hearing this, is that they cannot replace like more tangible interventions, right? So these are cost effective, light touch nudges and interventions. They're effective. And we've seen even in the presentations yesterday that these small behavioral interventions can have huge impacts as long as they are complemented with, economic incentives and other economic kind of programs. And in fact, subsequently, so this part of this project kind of motivated us into, eventually working in for a skilling program with PSDF, and I can get into more details about that. But what we found there was that when you combine an economic incentive to complete a skilling program and you bring in parents into that equation, so essentially you bring in people who matter, then having motivational nudges and having these light touch interventions coupled with economic incentives can perhaps have the biggest kind of impact. So that I would like to believe is the key policy takeaway that we have based on this work. I'll stop here. I hope I'm within time, and happy to take questions or any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamna. I would suggest that maybe you hold off or mark down your questions so that we have them for the Q&A session, which will also include a conversation on policy. I liked a lot the idea of exposing young women to a video and diversifying their role models, particularly seems to be effective to women that are probably also more sheltered, not only from low disadvantaged and disadvantaged background, but more sheltered socially. And I like your remark about how it's important to have complementary policy actions, not only on the behavioral side, which reminded me of what Imran was saying yesterday about not just, just lacking one constraint and falling into a second best world. But we spoke so far about female labor force participation, but what type of jobs women have and if they have careers can have important impacts on their decision to participate or not. And this is something that Professor Robertson, who's professor at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University, will talk about with his paper talk titled From Jobs to Career, Female Labor Market Dynamics in South Asia. Raymond,
thank you very
over
much,
to you.
Roberta. And I'd like to especially thank the organizers and our hosts here in Pakistan. I've never felt so welcomed or really at home. So I want to thank all of you for your hospitality. I especially want to thank, obviously, the GM Squared LM Lick program, Annabelle, for all your wonderful support, and obviously the IZA Viola for all of your wonderful organizing. And so I have to give credit to my amazing co-authors on this project, Danila Serra, who's been mentioned earlier. Many of you know her, and Amna, who's obviously involved in everything, apparently, and doing a wonderful job. And Farsana Afridi is our collaborator in India. She's a professor of economics at the Indian Statistical Institute. One of the things that we are trying to do with this project is, which is supported by the G Squared LM Lick program, is to really try and separate this conversation and move us from talking about jobs to careers. And we're going to make sure that people are kind of understanding the difference between these. We talk about jobs as being kind of a short-term focus. You need to have a job in order to just to get money to kind of get by to survive, whereas careers are more of a long-run commitment to the labor force. With jobs, there's little incentive to invest in training, and there's less interest in being promoted and pursuing opportunities within the firm, whereas with careers, there's a larger incentive to train, and you want to work to qualify for promotion, and both of those things are going to increase worker productivity and ultimately increase the productivity of firms. And so I think that it's in the firm's interest to make sure that people are thinking about a long-term attachment to both the labor force and the industry and the firm. And we see that factories obviously struggle with high turnover, and that results in search. And so, if people are committed in a longer term, that could bring down those costs and make firms more productive and ultimately increase GDP and living standards. So, that's why we're trying to argue that. Workers, thinking about jobs are going to engage in those kinds of behaviors, but if we can transform that mentality to careers, it's going to be positive for investment, and therefore understanding that distinction is important to help us design policies and programs to help bridge those gaps. So what are the barriers to careers? So one of the things we did is we worked with a large apparel retailer, a clothing retailer, who has factories in a large number of countries, in more than 20 countries. And we just pulled out a number of them here. And what you see is that we know that these are the male-female wage gap. So this is the male wage premium. So like a 1.1 on the bottom would be a 10% wage advantage for males. And you see that there's a lot of variation in the gender wage gap across countries, even within factories that are in the same industry doing the exact same thing. So there's a lot of heterogeneity across countries. And we see that in some countries, especially like in South Asia, Bangladesh, India, and in Pakistan as well, the gaps are much larger, right? So we see that these gaps vary a lot across countries, even within the same industries. So what is the reason for that? It could be supply and it could be demand, right? It could be either one of those things. So what we tried to do is also use those data to try and look at what happens within the firms, looking at those wage groups. And what we found, and this is consistent with other literature, is that entry-level jobs and entry-level positions for men and women often are paid the same. So those wage gaps are actually really small at the entry level. Where those wage gaps emerge is through promotions. And men get higher increases in wages as they move up the wage ladder. So they get more, they're promoted more often, and they're also getting larger increases in wages. So those wage gaps are actually most evident at the highest levels of the wage ladder and within the firm. If you also look at sort of that's on the price side. So as an economist, I want to know what happens to prices and quantities. And on the quantity side, you also see that women are much less likely to be represented as supervisors within firms. And so again, using kind of that same sample, a 1 would be equal representation of the same proportion of female supervisors to male supervisors as there are female employees in the firm to males, so it's just proportional as you go up. And what you see is that in a number of countries, a lot of heterogeneity across countries, you see in Bangladesh and Pakistan, India, women are quite underrepresented at the supervisory levels. So what we're seeing is that at the firm level, women get lower wages as workers move up the ladder. They're less likely to get higher wages when they're promoted to supervisors, but they also are being promoted at much lower rates. And so what this evidence motivated our study here to go into Bangladesh and India and Pakistan to do surveys of the workers and the firms to try and figure out, what are these barriers that women have to promotion. And so thanks to the support of the G-Squared LM-LIC program, we did baseline surveys in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India, and we did household surveys in addition in Pakistan. Ahmed's been doing a great job with those. And we just finished those, and so I'm going to give you just a little bit of results. If I had more than 10 minutes, I could fill up an hour, wink, wink, to talk about all of those results. But we're in the process of designing the intervention right now. So what we're going to do is we have management seminars and worker workshops, and we're actually implementing those in Bangladesh and India right now, and we're working on the interventions in Pakistan. So we should have those results in the follow-up surveys early next year. So I just want to tell you a little bit about what we found so far is that, and obviously I'm going to kind of summarize all of the results in one big thing, is that when you go and you ask women kind of what's your biggest concern about either applying for promotion or your worries about being promoted to supervisors, a lot of the things come out that we've already heard about. So transportation is a big deal, and we know that those things really matter for women's labor force participation. But in terms of career growth, right, one of the big concerns is that people they don't feel like they're skilled enough. Both men and women feel that way, but it's more prevalent for women in Bangladesh. And if you look at North India and South India, not being skilled enough. But the other thing that shows up a lot is this idea that they don't believe that their supervisors are going to appreciate the skills that they have. So when you actually say who's going to get promoted, the women believe that the supervisors, especially the male supervisors, don't believe that they are as skilled as they really are. And when we ask the women, well, are you really that skilled? And they're like, we are every bit as skilled as the men. We have no problems with that. And so they know that they have the same skills, but they just don't believe that their supervisors have the same perceptions. And when we differentiate between the male and female supervisors, women are much more likely to say, that the women are going to value their skills more than they believe the male supervisors will value their skills. So there's this idea that the men are undervaluing the women, and that gives them a disincentive to be applying for promotion and dedicating more attention and time to investing in a career. So the main results, as I said, there's this really stark misperception of abilities between workers and supervisors. There is a broad lack of skills among all workers, right? But there's very little evidence of family resistance or lack of a desire for promotion. And I'm really excited to hear the other work that we've done. We're all on the same page that saying that women they want to work, they want to get promoted, they want to move into the labor force, and their families support them, right? So there's a story that came out of Bangladesh and other places that the families don't support them. So that doesn't seem to be emerging in our data. So the interventions that we're planning are focusing on both expanding skills and helping supervisors do more accurate assessments of skills. It's not just like telling people, you need to, value women more. It's actually what kind of data and what kind of accurate assessments of skills are available that we could apply as an intervention in order to make sure that we have accurate measures of skills that would be related to the promotion criteria. And we believe that that kind of intervention, we expect that kind of intervention will be effective in alleviating that burden. So what are some of the institutional reforms? I mean, obviously, institutional policy reforms could offer support for career pathways, kind of promoting this idea in general that careers are important, that we want people to think about a long-term investment, and finding ways to support general versus specific training would also increase confidence. And so in the talk this morning about the certification that these workers can get that are specific to the industry, that's a great example of what I would call these general skills that are very valuable. And we saw this morning that they would increase the hiring of firms, and we could talk about that. So the certification could reduce that kind of information asymmetry that hinder progress on the demand side. And I would love to hear other ideas that you have going forward. So thank you very much for your comments, your questions, and especially the GM Squared alum for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. I have to say, I was not completely surprised by the emerging results that you presented, but did I get it right? The men undervalue the skills of their employee women. Doesn't that fit with the evidence that women hire more women in firms? And that's
Yes.
Chiplumkar and Goldberg, and then we see throughout all the World Bank employment surveys? Well,
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. To be continued. To be continued and still hold off to your questions, because now we have the opportunities to hear from people who live in the space of policy, advocacy, and all of the above, also academia. And so we have the fortune to be able to discuss these questions of female labor force participation, upskilling, and so on with Ms. Azhar, who's the chairperson of the National Commission of the Status of Women and a lifelong advocate of women and labor rights, and with Mr. Ahmed Khan, who's the CEO of the Punjab Skills Development Fund, besides having been a pioneer of e-commerce in Pakistan, so bringing both public sector and private sector experience. So let me start with Ms. with a question for you. And that's a question that I find recurring in South Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And it's about the role of social norms, which the research continues to highlight as persistent. So from your perspective, what do you think are legislative actions or reforms that we need to think about or highlight for those who are listening?
So thank you so much. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
First mic on. So thank you so much for this question, and thank you so much for the panelists for setting the tone. And I think each paper needs an extensive discussion, because all these three important topics come from a different angle, but they are targeting the women and labor force market. So I think that as far as having this opportunity to talk to this panel here, what I think that we miss in policy-related reform is the institutionalization of research-based interventions and making into the policies. So whatever policies we have in Pakistan, they are very good, and we are an over-legislative country with all sorts of legislations. But what we lack is that alignment with the different needs and different sects of working class, which we have in Pakistan, and they have been highlighted. And the last presentation by Mr. Robert, it targeted basically on the women workers. And again, we have examples from the other two presentations. So I think the mismatch is between the institutional planning, research, and the need, the community need. So what in the absence of these things, I think the institutional behavior and mentoring intervention are missing from the policy making. Though we have very good policies, but when it comes to the implementations, we have several gaps and lacunas. And when we talk about reaching out to the masses from different sectors, and I must say that the informality we have in Pakistan, the programs that are being made and the policies that are being made are out of the box. So I think there is a gap in the planning structures. And with the societal norms that we have, and we are very much aware of the facts, and Dr. Hamna presentation pointed out that. So we are not preparing our women, our girls, for careers. So they are not being mentored, as pointed out that there's a deficit of female or women household mentors or champions, even in the areas where there are a group of like informal workers who are defined as home-based workers. So the entrepreneurship related market and financial inclusion is still missing from their community, the role models, the peer group, and community engagement. So these are the deficits that we see on the ground. So whatever the policies are there, there is a mismatch between the community needs and what needs to be implemented. And when it comes to like the budgetary allocations, the monitoring and implementation, we have a very weak system.
So in a way, you highlight something that has been a sort of common thread of all the conversations in these 3 days, which is how to bridge from research to policy. And it sounds like music to my ears that the first thing that you said is like, we need to institutionalize a mechanism that allows research to happen, findings to be translated into policy, and these findings then to find an outlet. But if I were to dig more in what you have seen in all your years of work in this field as the actual constraints and barriers that women face, I mean, we saw the survey in Hamda's work, we saw, and it was like household constraints, bargain with the father, the husband, it was harassment, it was discrimination. We saw the evidence on safety, access to digital device. What have you seen from working with the community, working with your constituencies?
So I think first and the foremost thing is...
And if I may add, for whom? Because clearly there is a heterogeneity between highly educated women and rural women or women without skills. What do you see?
So I think the whole education system in Pakistan, and when it comes to the community, it is not aspiring for the women to enter into careers. So we have a very good example of the girls who have attained their degrees in medical, and 70% are not in professional. So this is one sector. So the education, career building, and job placements, the three things that work in the labor economics or labor dynamics, is not coherent. It's not like interconnected. And when it comes to like the public sector schools, the whole context of like career counseling is missing. What we are giving, what we are providing in the name of education is not aspiring the students to go and attain the career and adopt careers. And when it comes to women, they face all these barriers that you have already pointed out. They come from the backgrounds where they are not permitted to even complete their educations, and there are like girls who are married off earlier. We have a high ratio of women who are girls and who are married before the age of 18. So they are not into this career building. So they adopt the careers after they are, I'm talking about a certain class of the majority of the women who are living below, beyond, who are living below and at the verge of the poverty index. So when they adopt a career, whether it's like going to the factory or whether it's like starting their own business or whether it's like several other jobs, it is because of the need of the household income. So they want to contribute into the household. So they are not trained to adopt a career. So this is basically the societal norms that hinder the major class of women. And the reason why we have a very low labor force representation in Pakistan is because it's not connected. And another important thing, rightly pointed out, that the social norms, there is lack of permission from the household. It's male-headed households, and when they go out, there's a lot of harassment. And now with these harassment policies, we have seen that a certain class of women, they have entered the workforce, and that is through the some policies. I would like to mention here the State Bank policy on banking on equality, which they have improved, and they have like invited women, and the ratio has increased. But that's one sector. With all the harassments policy, with all the care related policies there. But again, this is just one example. So there's the holistic framework of encouraging women, encouraging girls to come into the economic field is still like missing. It's just like saying one step forward and two steps back. So this is the struggle that is going on. Apart from the researchers, apart from what we are seeing here, the whole scenario is not feeding into the data of the women labor force market.
So in a way, I think you're pointing out that a sort of set of constraints that affect all women, be it safety or protection from harassment, but different constraints that play out across the spectrum, the socioeconomic spectrum, from not being able to complete education to having education that is not necessarily geared to a profession. In a conversation over lunch the other day, we were talking about going to university for women as a sorting mechanism to find a husband, rather than something that is channeled productively. I have a paper on this, which I don't mean to plug today. This is not a joke, but so there's a sense in which different type of interventions would be needed for different type of groups. And this is to me like an interesting segue to get to the questions for Dr. Ahmed, who has experience on training, structuring it in innovative ways, not only for the market and making relevant for a changing market, but also in financial way. We can talk about that in a moment. But my first question for you is like, what do you think is needed for women to make that step in terms of upskilling them and helping them orient towards not only a job, but a career?
So it's a tough one, right? If you start from the bigger picture, from the way I view it, one of the big challenges that you know doesn't get talked about enough is that we don't have a great big economy or a big growing economy. So one of the big challenges is, okay, once we have no growing industry, we have no sort of up and coming industry, we have no big industry. So just from the start, I think we're at a disadvantage because of the constraints of our economy, and sort of the last few years haven't been great. So that's sort of setting the context. In response to your question, that what needs to be done is quite a bit, right? So I think we've spoken about the social aspects and sort of the family constraints and sort of the societal constraints. For us, we design programs to sort of keeping in view that these constraints exist. How can we now sort of still manage to deliver something? So we came up with sort of a few digital ways of doing it, right? So Kate talked about the digital divide as well. So the first step was, okay, can we deliver these trainings digitally, which sort of eliminates the constraints of mobility then. So if we can give it online, but then we found out that yes, obviously you can design LMSs where you can put all those training modules, you can give live training, but these people don't have access to digital devices. So we came up with this program which we've called Mayor Digital. What that does is that we bought desktops and we delivered them to females living in rural areas. So rural, and when we say rural, we mean rural, not peri-urban, not semi-urban. These are like, villages as defined by the urban unit. So we gave them that. We gave them internet devices to make sure they had access to the internet. And then, we hired women trainers to deliver the training. We set the modules in such a way that we have to give them digital skills. And when we say digital skills, I'm not talking about high advanced like, DevOps or Python or, sort of advanced AI. These are more sort of basic digital skills in terms of digital marketing, in terms of chat GPT prompting, AI prompting, as we call it, setting up an e-commerce store. So, and then we hired females, like I said, to deliver them. And then on top of that, we built modules that are going to teach them financial literacy, financial independence, digital finance, communication skills, stuff like, grooming and sort of how to prepare for job interviews. So now all of a sudden, and then we made them flexible that, they're not 9 to 12. You can attend at 9 to 12, but then it'll also be available online later that you can access on our LMS and, go through the training later, and you'll have access to the instructor. So, programs like these make a big difference, right? Or sort of start addressing some of the problems. Then the next wall we hit was, how do you find, after 2 months, they're like, yeah, but what are we going to do after this training? So then the wall that we hit is, okay, how do we lead training to employment? And then, as you mentioned, which I found, a very articulate way of saying something which I'd never thought about was, it's not just jobs, we want to build careers for them, right? And then, and because they're in rural settings, there are no jobs available. The only jobs available are sort of, the school teacher or sort of the closest government degree college teacher. So then we started talking about entrepreneurship. So we started figuring out, okay, what products can these young ladies develop that they can then sell and generate income. And all sorts of stuff came up, right? We can teach them freelancing, we can teach them sort of, digital tools like, PowerPoint and graphic designing. But what we're really trying to do is, say, okay, you live in a citrus area. Can you sort of, pack citrus in such a way and sell that online? Is there a way for you to sort of, develop a supply chain where you can, bring your indigenous product and bring it to the nearest city? So that's sort of what we're working on. So then the next wall that we hit is, again, something that everyone talked about is where we find role models, right? So again, so now we're out searching for female role models who can now mentor and sort of guide and decide that, okay, you've gotten training, you sort of understood what you want to sell, but you need constant help and support. So these are the kind of programs that now we're designing to sort of address some of these challenges for women. We did another program for transgender. Again, it's just a huge challenge trying to fit them into society and bring them to a classroom and then get the other students to sort of accept them. So we give them transport allowances, we give them special buses to sort of, move, and then, give them safe spaces to sort of create. So these are the sort of things that we're designing and sort of keeping in mind, given the constraints that we have.
So I have tons of questions, none of which were written up here. So I'll hold them for later. But let me just ask one quick follow-up. Like when you work with employers, because I imagine that your trainees are your client, but your clients are also the employers. Yeah. What do they want? And what, if anything, what do you see that might prevent them from hiring a woman?
So one of the big things that all employers want is to pay less, right?
Okay. I come from a panel on taxation, so yeah.
It's unfortunately true, right? Like, no matter how you look at it. The other thing that they really, sort of disapprove of is churn, right? So employee churn. So they hate it when people come and leave, and so those two things. The third thing they hate is sort of a lack of discipline. That, oh, my child is sick today. Oh, I have to make food today. Like, so these sort of things are what they're actually happy with low skill. But it's the other irritants that they find. Again, I'm not saying they're right. I completely disagree with them. But these are sort of what we face from the employer side. What really pains me is when I talk to an employer and they said, oh, okay, we'll hire these women as part of CSR. I'm like, no, these people
What
are
is CSR?
corporate social responsibility. So it's sort of an affirmative action.
I thought it was a Pakistan specific.
No, sorry.
act.
So our point is they're just as well trained, they're just as capable, they will deliver the same output. So why are you treating them like charity? So they're using it as an excuse to pay less. So again, it's not universal, but sort of majority of the people we talk to somehow.
Just a quick follow-up, as reconnected to what Raymond was saying earlier, to these papers that are popping up now showing that women hire more women. Do you find that when you talk to female employer, they are more understanding about disruptions in the workplace? Dr. Umi is going like, no. Okay.
Yes and no, right? Because successful women.
No from my side because I have
Okay.
Successful women, what we found, this is again, part of our sort of our understanding, that they feel like we had such a tough time. Why should we cut other people's slack, right? So that's one mindset. But we also get the other mindset that yes, I'm going to empower more women and then get them out there and give them opportunities that I never had or people don't have. So we've seen a bit of both, to be honest.
So I think that statistically, the second mindset is winning.
Hopefully.
But I hear you. Now, join me for a round of initial applause to this fantastic panel. And also to you, because you've been patiently waiting or listening for an opportunity to interact with them.
We only have a few people sleeping, that's why.
That's okay. It's a full room, so we're going to do okay. So let me start collecting a few questions, and then if you can introduce yourself and indicate whom your question is directed to, that would be great. So let me put like 4 or 5, and if the microphone can go around. Okay.
I'm Sahim, development
Oh, you
practitioner.
were hugging the microphone.
Yeah.
'Cause the first question was there. Okay, that's all right.
They can take the first question.
That's okay.
So my question from Raymond is that I understand in your study you find that women employees, they perceive that their male supervisor undervalue their skills. Did you also get a chance to survey those male supervisors and actually find the evidence whether they actually undervalue their skills of those supervisors, or there were actually other reasons of behind these perceptions? Because we need to actually break these perceptions and other social constraints that are becoming the constraints.
Very good. Don't forget to introduce yourselves as you ask your question.
So I'm Sahim. I have been working as a development practitioner with multilateral agencies, including the World Bank, UNDP, UNICEF.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. It was one of the.
I have the mic, so
Okay.
should I? Yep. Hi, my name's Nida Kirmani. Yeah. And I teach sociology here at LUMS, and sometimes I teach gender and development. And right now I'm teaching a course on masculinities. And I'm saying that because my question is about masculinities. And it's not directed at any one particular panelist, but what I heard in many of the excellent presentations was that a lot of the constraints are often coming from men, whether it's men within the home, not kind of allowing their wives to work outside of the home, or men within the workplace thinking that women employees don't have the same kinds of skills or capacity to lead, or men in public spaces harassing women on the way to work. That stops women from taking public transport if it's available. And what kind of frustrates me about the field of gender and development, or gender studies in general, even though I see myself as part of that field, is that often the focus is on women and how do we get more skills to women, and how do we give women more confidence, and how do we get women to apply for more jobs, and how. But it's very rare that I've heard of any interventions focusing on men. I'm sure there are some, and I'd love to hear about them, especially if you all have made them. But in Pakistan, we know that like time use surveys show that women do 11 hours of unpaid work within the household as compared to 1 hour of unpaid labor by men. And then it seems to be expected that women can just kind of magically this work will get done and they'll be able to progress in terms of their jobs and their careers. But nothing about the men has changed in terms of expectations around gender roles. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that, or whether you know of any interventions that focus more on men and how effective they've been. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Very interesting panel. So the question that I have is, it's kind of directed to Kate, but anyone's welcome to answer. So you showed from your results that how significant a constraint is transportation from the supply side, and how once you sort of relax it, how significantly does it improve the labor market outcomes? Some of my work that, which kind of tries to understand the firm side constraints to female labor force entry also educates me that, given all the constraints, for firms also, the cost of providing safe transportation seems to be the biggest hurdle for them. So when you think about the policy options, given your work and what you've learned from your field work, when you have to sort of address this constraint, which side of the labor market do you think is the supply side or the demand side would be more beneficial for kind of tackling this constraint?
For
Who should the
transport?
burden really fall on?
For transport, you're talking about?
Yeah, transportation.
Thank you. Let's take around 1, 2, and 3, and then we turn to.
Yeah, I'm Abdurrahman Chima from UNICEF. So my question is to Ahmed Khan. Recently, everywhere governments in the world are pressed for, seeking more financing for social investments. So recently we heard that Punjab government, and particularly your department, is looking into some alternative financing for social investments. If you can share some details, that would be great. Thank you.
So this was a question, sorry, I couldn't hear well. So it was a question about social.
So we are hearing that governments are pressed for fiscal constraints,
Yeah.
lack of resources for social investments.
Social investments.
But recently there have been some initiatives by government of Punjab and particularly
Okay.
Khan's
Very
department
good.
about social
Thanks.
investments.
And there were 2 questions there.
Hello. Women as a gender, it is with perhaps no doubt that they're fighting many battles and on many fronts. And even after all these bargains, only a small percentage ends up running the long race. However, there is also women coming from different ethnicities in Pakistan, residing in Pakistan, and from different religions. And because of these identities, they have to face different sorts of discrimination, right? So I'm interested in knowing that if any of your studies, that anybody is welcome to answer this question, have studied about these different identities presiding in Pakistan that face scrutiny, and if any of these identities received any interventions, and in what ways, with a very intersection lens.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All these steps discussed are really appreciable. But do you think that a society in Pakistan that very male-dominated patriarchal norms restricted women from working, and how we can overcome this and to ensure gender equality and female empowerment? Thank you very much.
Let's take one last one there, and then we'll move to the next round.
Hello, my name is Halima, and I am a student at LUMS, a senior year student, and my question is directed towards Dr. Hamna. In your work, you talked about how the metric of seeing a successful woman or a role model is usually a woman who is working or who is involved in the labor force. So for my own personal understanding, is that the only metric of judging this is a successful woman, or are there other ways of seeing because I feel like that probably comes from a place of privilege and the opportunities you get to get involved in the labor force in the workplace. So are there any other ways of seeing or judging that metric of like different role models or different sorts of opportunities women get?
Thank you. So we have a very rich set of questions on role models, social norms, discrimination towards different groups, and some masculinity, and then some specific questions that were directed to Dr. Ahmed on social investment, to Kate on transportation and cost, and to Raymond as supervisor. So why don't we start from Kate and we move along, and you guys answer what you were asked, what seems relevant to you.
Sounds great. So I'll speak to two of them. So one, obviously, Zanya, you were asking about the transport costs. So I have two thoughts to share about that. One is that, depending on how flexible things are in the supervisor-worker relationship, it may be that even if we, as some sort of policy actor, try to direct the cost one way or the other, that it can get reallocated. So for example, let's say that somebody were paying for a woman to get a free transport. It's also possible the employer might respond by paying her less because he realizes that she's getting that value. So it can be hard to kind of fully determine that from outside that relationship. But I think the bigger thing I want to emphasize with respect to your point is that, and I tried to allude to this in the end of my talk about the transport project yesterday, but I really want to emphasize it very strongly that I think the solution to this the mobility problem is really, we should ideally not be thinking about targeted transport so much as about safer physical mobility for everyone around the city, but for everyone going everywhere. And so that means things like good street lighting everywhere, good sidewalks everywhere, mass transit that runs frequently and on time and actually goes to all the places that you would want to go, so that you're not standing for 20 minutes, in a creepy street corner in the dark waiting for a bus that might or might not come, as well as policing interventions that specifically target harassment, which have been shown to be effective in other South Asian contexts. So if we move in that direction, then it kind of makes this then we can think about it more as like a question of public infrastructure and less about a specific targeted thing that is expensive that somebody then has to subsidize. Then I want to just on the masculinity thing. A lot of my work is not focused on this, but one of the studies that I talked about for about 20 seconds in the in the short overview, I want to just mention about a little bit more because it is a little relevant to this. So I said that in what we see in the aggregate data on job talash is that the biggest part of the wedge in terms of gender and job search is coming actually from employers that just post ads that are closed to women in the first place. And we do more in the paper to try to unpack why they're closed to women in the first place. But we're now doing a follow-up experiment to understand that. And that has two arms, one of which is to encourage the employer, who's often a man, to open the job to women. And the other is just to make it not allowed to do that. Like, say, okay, we're going to send you female and male applicants no matter what. There have been two studies that do this kind of thing, one in Austria and one in China, and they both had like the forcing open of the jobs, like making it illegal or disallowing gendered job ads. And they have both had kind of promising results, but Austria and China are not the same as Pakistan. And so we want to know kind of what happens. And it's not obvious that it'll help. It might make things worse because it could, if the preferences for male employees are that very, very strong for various reasons, then, forcing kind of an equal opportunity set of applications could just add noise to the process for everyone. It could be that you're now sending a woman 10 ads instead of 2, so she has to sort through and she's wasting her time applying for the 8 that will never really hire her. So that is part of the reason why we're trying to study it empirically, because it could be that it's great and it could be that it actually just wastes everybody's time and makes things in aggregate worse. And so it doesn't address the home piece of what you're talking about at all, but it's starting to kind of get a little bit into this question of how sticky are those employer preferences? Like, is this just something that they're kind of defaulting to because they think, oh yeah, I guess let's keep men, or is it something that's much more strong than that?
Thank you. Raymond.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. Before I answer that, I'm going to kind of start broadly, and that is, this is the economics and development policy conference. And I think the goal of economic development policy is to improve living standards and make everyone happier. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. And I think the way we can do that is we have to make people more productive. And in order to make people more productive, one good way is to improve match quality. And that means that there are some people who want to stay home and take care of kids. And there are some people who want to dedicate their lives to a career. If we can allow people to match in the best possible way to do what they want to do best, that will increase productivity and increase GDP. So one of the problems, obviously, is that there are barriers to those matches because, as we talked about before, men don't want to necessarily hire women, and so they're prohibiting those matches. So how do we overcome that? This might be, to answer your question specifically, no manager is going to say, I undervalue women's skills, right? So we ask them, no one's going to say that, but they will say things like, I don't want to give women overtime because I'm worried about their safety going home after the shift. Or I don't want to give women overtime because I believe that they have home responsibilities. You know what I mean? So there's this paternalism that also needs to be overcome. So one thing that we are trying to do in our interventions is to specifically talk to managers about how do we more accurately assess skills, how do we more accurately assess what women want to do and what they're able to do, and then that will be a first step. I realize that my sociologist friends and my anthropologist friends call me naive, but I do believe in economics. I'm an economic evangelist, and I do believe that there is a rationality in improving this match quality. If people are more productive and they can earn more, then their standard of living is going to increase. And one of the things that came out from our baseline is that when we ask husbands, so if your wife is making this much more money by going to work, are you in favor of that? And they're like, yes, absolutely, right? Because they want more money in the household. Now, the problem, obviously, is that they still expect the women to be doing all the housework at the same time. Like, they don't think they're going to do more housework. So we're going to have to try and find ways to reevaluate how the household allocation of labor is decided. But if, these steps, I think, will become easier by starting with that economic rationale of making people more productive and having much better matches.
I'm afraid that this is not disconnected from what Ahmed was talking about the disruption in the workplace. If chores are so unbalanced between male and female, the disruptions will also fall primarily on female, and then you get the results that you get. But let me turn to Hamna for her reactions.
I think I'll take questions from Nida Kirmani and Halima. So thank you so much for those. There has been work that primarily kind of tries to target male members in the household. So in the context of India, there's been work where, similar promotional videos have been shown of women, successfully working to not just the female, but also including her parents-in-law or husbands. And there's been evidence that shows that that has resulted in improvement in sign-ups, though they've not found sustainable results. So 1 year, 2 years down the road, those effects have kind of dissipated. So one can talk about, ways of perhaps sustaining that. There's also been work in the context of Saudi Arabia, which, we think that it's a place where men would perhaps have really regressive kind of expectations about what women should and should not do. And what researchers find in that context is that actually privately a lot of men support the idea that their wives should work, but because they think that the social norm, that other men around them would not support this idea, so they actually so they're likely to reduce their support. And when you provide that information to them, that, in general, the society around you, men around you are not as conservative as you think, they actually increase their support for their wives to work. In our own work, we're trying to do something similar along those lines. We also find evidence of women actually. So we surveyed 300 couples working in the government sector, and we find that women actually really, really overestimate the extent to which their husbands would not like them to work, or the extent to which they will receive disapproval from their husbands. But actually, when we ask the same things from the husbands, we find that they seem to be a lot more okay with that. So we're thinking of trying to come up with what kind of an intervention might be effective in terms of bridging these information gaps. So happy to chat more later after the session. To Halima's question, I think Raymond's response has really kind of addressed that in some way. So again, where there could be different ways of looking at success. You could look at success from a psychologist's perspective. You can look at it from an anthropologist, from an economist's perspective. But here, given the setting that we're at, we're looking at the not so favorable impacts on the economy because of the fact that this huge chunk of our labor force is not participating in the labor market, and the subsequent productivity losses, the GDP losses, and taking a stab at that from that perspective. That's where our measure of success is coming from. I also want to add that in the documentary, our message was not just that you should be working. I think a large part of the message that these women were giving was that it's possible. Home is important, family is important, all these things are important, but yes, it's possible to kind of balance and overcome a lot of these. So not saying that these are just psychological, the fact that women think they won't be able to balance everything, but a part of it is psychological. So kind of showcasing that this is possible and it's achievable, and therefore perhaps helping them take that first step, which perhaps in many cases, at least for me, always taking that first step, waking up in the morning and deciding, no, I have to go for my workout. It usually, the first step is usually the hardest step. So we're hoping that we can change that, and that's pretty much what we were getting at.
Thank you, Hamna. And nice. That's a Monday morning. So we're pressed for time. So let me turn to Uma for her reaction.
So thank you so much. I would just like to answer the question of ethnicity there.
Yeah.
So yes, ethnicity plays a very critical role when it comes to employment and labor. So I can give you an example from my personal experience while I was working in Balochistan with Hazara community and Afghan communities. So there was a small unit working within the community because they were not allowed to go out. So the malpractices that those women, that group faced was with regard to finding job, with regard to payment of wages, and with regard to engagement with the labor unions in terms of their complaints and redressal mechanisms. So the grievances. So the government would not take up their point of view or provide them protection just because they belong to a certain specific cadre. And that has further aggravated when all of these groups, they migrated to Sindh, specifically Karachi. So the Hijrat colony, Sultanabad, after the Swat insurgencies from KPK. So there is a huge practice now with regard to the ethnicity. Punjab is fortunate enough that we are not facing this, but there is quite a lot of, even in the civil services, we face that. So this is something that I just wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Uma and Ahmed.
Yeah, so on the social investments, so typically the Punjab government has sort of three focus areas as far as social investments is concerned. So one is around human capital, the other is around healthcare, and the third is around education. They seem fairly intuitive that this is what the government should focus social investments on. Typical players are the World Bank and Asian Development Bank who are participating. I don't know too much about it, but that's sort of what we're seeing, right?
Well, thank you all. We started with a little bit of delay, so I just wanted to see whether there are any urgent questions. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's take these 3 urgent questions, and I urge you to be very brief. And
yes, no.
And yes, too. Yes, no. And you too.
Yes,
okay, 1.
Yeah. So we are talking about the lack of empowerment and the inclusion. One, that when you are talking about the survey where the husband are coming up with a very socially desirable answer, I really don't know, because this is considered to be, because I am a sociologist, I am Dr. Nabiha. So this is considered to be one of the biases when it comes to the survey. So they mean, everybody likes to say, yeah, I would allow my wife, but really comes to the stakeholder, the person who's receiving it. So secondly, we are talking all about women, but we are not talking about the structural shift, because it is a structure which is barring them the access to public spaces, talking about the the facilitation at the workplace center, how to convince the employer to cut down from their profit because we are in a new liberal economy, and provide the daycare center and whatever facilities are needed. So I think the onus is not on the women, it is on the structure. So what about the structural shift?
Very good. Two. And then there was a third question here, if you're still there. Okay.
Hello, my name is Fizan. I'm a graduate student at the University of Chicago. My question is to Ahmed. It's primarily regarding the program that you were running. So, of the number of participants who either completed or just about to complete that program, was there more of a focus on digital or freelancing, or as you mentioned, that based on their socioeconomic or geographic context, were they focusing on setting up entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial endeavors regarding their setting up a supply chain for citrus fruits? So, what was the more focus on that front?
Very good. And last question.
You didn't give it to the female participant.
I thought it was being an equal opportunity offender.
I thought I was, it's
oh,
fine.
I thought it was, okay, 4. And that's the last. Okay, 3.
Thank you, ma'am. Basically, my question is from Dr. Hamna Ahmed. As she has mentioned in her presentation about that women face non-material constraints such as lack of role models and self-confidence, household approval, pressure about balancing home and work. So, ma'am, firstly, my question is about that to what extent does the cultural norms, especially looking to this peripheral society and community in the South Asian nations, in the Central Asian nations, and especially talking about Pakistan. So over here, the patriarchal household structure are too much to be considered as very devastating settings over here. As they result, Pakistani women's participation in labor force, despite in rising educational attains, those cultural norms are not to be considered because the sentiments, whether they are religious sentiments or the societal sentiments. Secondly, why do families in Pakistan continue to prioritize women's household over professional careers, especially in the urban or the professional careers? Thank you.
Thank you. And last question.
Yes.
Briefly.
I'll be very quick.
Yeah, is it a comment or a question? Like, what's the question?
About the cultural norms, that to what extent does the cultural norms play a role in the labor force for the women? Has the Pakistani culture and then sentiments are too much, not that much feasible? Their cultures are also having too much barriers and restraints. So
very good. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll just be very quick. I think my question is for all of the panelists that in a time where remote working has become more common, and one would think that it allows women to sort of release some constraints around, being physically present, saving on transport costs, childcare, etc. I'm interested to know how employers are thinking about making their recruitment practices more inclusive, and whether there's evidence or data to suggest, given remote working conditions, if differences exist between productivity of women and men workers. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see 2 connected questions. One which was like household factors versus structural factors, and the other one that was digging deeper in the both household and societal factors about social norms. And other 2 connected questions. One on practically the program was, how did you shift to digital, and connected, what's the role of remote work? So I don't think that all of you need to answer. If who would like to pick it up? Maybe let me start from Ahmed, because there was one clearly directed to you.
So it's still early days. We're still sort of in month 3 of a 6-month program. What we're seeing is they want to do content creation more than anything else. TikTok, advertising and things like that, more social media stuff than set up an e-commerce store for mangoes.
Yeah, so I think I can speak to both questions. In response to your question about to what extent social norm or societal norms constrain labor force participation, I think my sense is that so you can think of people where earning is, or females' contribution to the household pool is really the need. I mean, if it's a matter of survival, then what we see is that need kind of trumps the social norm. But it's really in households that are relatively more privileged that we see social norm to be a lot more binding. That's one. The second thing is that in terms of thinking about how do we change the norm, then I think there's a lot of literature now coming out that shows that engaging, members in the household that matter in the decision-making process, giving women control over their earnings, improving like communication or negotiation skills amongst women. So those are the kinds of interventions that are showing to be effective in trying to kind of also, sharing information about what the general societal norm is, and in some cases a lot of that has been misperceived by individuals. So those are the kinds of things that are being shown to be effective. And I've actually forgotten your question.
Household versus structural factors.
Household versus structural factors that we need structure. I agree. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We quote the research, we are talking about two people, the men who are filling in the survey questionnaires and the women, and we are asking them what is their behavior towards
I agree. It's a social, yeah. So there are ways in which, so the work that we have done so far, that's exactly what the constraint is, and we're trying to overcome that. But some of the other work that I cited, so in that, the stakes are actually high, and there's actual behavioral change that we observe. For instance, women sign up more on a platform, or they're more likely to submit an application, they're more likely to eventually transition into the labor market. So when you actually see real change in behavior and not just survey responses, that's kind of, and that's also the path that people who make these claims, they take, that it's not just about asking men about what they think or what their perception is, but you also then try to back that up with some real stake or real evidence.
Can I just make one quick?
Of course.
I think it's very important at this point of time that we need to integrate the behavioral tools into the public policy, which is missing at the moment. And that would lead to national level campaigns on normalizing the women economic role in our society. So I think that is something very important that we need to take at our institution and ensure.
Thank you, Ume. And on my side, I don't think I can at all think of summarizing such a discussion, but I just wanted to add one reflection that I had as we were talking about these important topics. There's a flurry of literature now that quantifies the gains from higher female labor force participation in the economy. And a colleague of mine has a paper that shows that if Egypt were to equalize the employment between men and women, there would be a gain of 51% of GDP. That's a huge number. And the very simple mechanism is like, if you remember your macro, think about the solo model. If you inject more people into the economy, then the returns to capital increase because capital is more scarce. More capital comes into the economy, and in steady state, we get not only a phone call, but also we get higher output. So if the gains are so high, why isn't it happening? So that's the mind-boggling question that I see there in the literature. And it's not happening for a slew of constraints because the models are models and reality is reality. And I think that today we dug into a series of these constraints on the supply side. I think primarily we talked about the supply side and barriers from the supply side, but we also talked about the demand side. And something that kind of struck me that Ahmed interjected as kind of like, well, there are not enough jobs. And I'm like, ka-ching, that's a big deal. There are not enough jobs in the economy. So there's an agenda that goes beyond things that are fundamental to do to slack supply side constraints that has to do with an economy and a private sector that works. And I think you correctly said, we pivoted to entrepreneurship, but also for entrepreneurship to succeed beyond TikTok, you need an ecosystem for those firms to go from one employee to 2, 3, 4 and grow. So I think the agenda is large, but I couldn't be happier to be in such great company, not only of panelists, but also of audience to have discussed something so important and with so much fervor. So thank you very much, everyone. And the tea is outside.